Welcome to today's deep dive. Usually when we talk about finding our life's purpose or, achieving some kind of ultimate success, there's this underlying expectation of a very clear, rigid ladder.
Right, like a set path you're supposed to follow.
Exactly. You put your head down, you do the grueling work, you get the promotion, and basically everyone in your life can visibly track your upward trajectory.
Yeah, you look at the person standing on the rung right next to you. You know exactly where you stand in the whole hierarchy of accomplishment.
But imagine being the first century apostle Peter and watching that entire ladder just suddenly vanish from beneath your feet.
Huh.
Because, he has basically just been handed the ultimate promotion. He is named the primary leader of this massive new movement.
Right.
But his retirement plan involves being publicly brutally executed. Like, he is explicitly told he will be crucified.
It is the absolute heaviest crown of leadership imaginable. Just the sheer psychological weight of being told your life's work will culminate in a violent death, it's staggering.
Yeah, it really is.
And what makes this historical moment so profoundly human is how Peter actually reacts to that terrifying prophecy. He doesn't just stoically accept his fate.
Not at all.
He turns around, sees his colleague, John, a man who is, known for a much quieter, contemplative energy, and asks a question that completely derailed the early community. Peter points at John and essentially asks, well, what about him?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because this dynamic between Peter and John, which we are drawing from a really fascinating collection of Vietnamese Catholic reflections known as Suy Nghien, it explores the absolute core of how we measure our own worth and our own purpose.
It really gets to the heart of it.
And frankly, even if you have zero background in theology, that instinct to look sideways at someone else's life path just to gauge your own fairness, that is a universal human reflex.
Oh, absolutely.
So to put the scene in perspective for you, Peter is staring down a brutal destiny. Meanwhile, John, who the texts often refer to as the beloved disciple, is the guy who leaned intimately on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper. He's the thinker, right? The philosopher.
The academic type, almost.
Yeah. So Peter asking, does he have to die too, is basically the ancient equivalent of modern workplace envy.
It's a textbook psychological trap.
Yeah.
We assume that if someone else's path lacks the visible hardship of our own, it's somehow less valid or maybe a sign of favoritism.
Right. It's like grinding away at this massive, terrifying corporate promotion with just unimaginable stress, looking across the hall at your coworker who gets to sit in their quiet office brainstorming strategy and marching into the CEO's office to complain.
Yeah, why does he get the quiet job?
Exactly. Why are we so obsessed with the trajectory of others instead of our own?
What's fascinating here is how the narrative handles Peter's sense of injustice, because Jesus' response completely rejects the premise that their paths even need to be comparable.
Right. He doesn't entertain it at all.
No, he tells Peter, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. He shuts down the comparison trap instantly. But, human nature being what it is, the early community latched onto that specific word, remain.
Oh, they spun it totally out of control. They took remain to mean something literal, like physical.
Yeah, a rumor caught fire that John was literally never going to die. The community whispered that he had been granted physical immortality while Peter was handed this awful death sentence.
Which is wild.
Right. And the texts we are exploring point out that the author of the gospel actually had to insert an editorial note later on just to clarify the misunderstanding. Like, Jesus didn't say John wouldn't die. He was simply stating that John's vocation was entirely different.
It wasn't about living forever.
No, John's calling was to remain in memory, to remain in love, and basically to survive long enough to synthesize this entire movement into the fourth gospel near the end of the first century.
When he was, nearly 100 years old?
Yeah, right around there.
Which, in the ancient world, 99 years old might as well be immortal. But the psychology here is just wild to me. Peter assumes that because John's path lacks dramatic violence, it is somehow an easier road. We just instinctively equate suffering with significance.
And that assumption is incredibly dangerous. Peter's calling required explosive action and ultimate physical sacrifice, but John's calling required endurance.
Right.
And frankly, it is so much harder to measure endurance because it totally lacks a grand, spectacular finale.
Yeah, that leads directly into a massive shift in how these reflections challenge us to think about purpose. Because we have this deeply romanticized notion of the sudden heroic sacrifice. We love the idea of dying for a cause. It's, cinematic.
We idolize the grand gesture for sure.
And there's this brilliant historical parallel detailed in the source text that perfectly captures this tension between the two paths.
Yeah.
The dramatic sacrifice versus the quiet endurance. Involves Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War.
Yes, that story flips the entire hero narrative completely upside down.
It really does. So Lincoln had this young officer assigned to work as his secretary. It was a desk job. It was safe, administrative, and miles away from any real danger.
Yeah.
But this young officer was notoriously brave, and he fiercely hated being sidelined. He desperately wanted to be out on the front lines, in the mud and the blood, dying for his country.
He wanted the glory.
Exactly. So he constantly pestered the president, just begging for a combat transfer. Finally, Lincoln looks this fiery young man right in the eye and delivers this devastating critique. He says, "You want to die for your country, but maybe you don't want to live for it."
Wow.
I know, it is a total gut punch, because dying for a cause is an event. It is undeniably brave, but it is finite. You muster your courage, you make the ultimate sacrifice, and it is over.
Right, it's done.
But living for a cause is entirely different. It means waking up on a random Tuesday, pouring your coffee, and doing the slow, unglamorous, agonizingly mundane administrative work of your mission day after day for decades.
And the texts make a really powerful linguistic connection here. If we trace the origin of the word martyr, the root meaning actually strips away all that violence we usually associate with it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The original etymology simply means to bear witness. That's it. It was only later in history, basically because so many early witnesses were executed, that the word became synonymous with a bloody death.
That makes so much sense.
Right. But fundamentally, bearing witness does not require a cross or a sword or a battlefield. It simply requires providing evidence of your belief through your life.
So Peter and John are essentially just two different mechanisms of the exact same word.
Precisely. Peter proved his devotion through loud, public declarations and a dramatic execution. John proved his through a century of quiet loyalty. I mean, consider John's actual resume of witness over his lifetime. He didn't just write a book and hide in a room.
Right, he was there for the hardest parts.
Exactly. When the other followers fled the chaos of the crucifixion, John stood right near the cross and took Mary as his own mother.
He also famously outran Peter to the empty tomb on Easter morning, didn't he?
He did. Though, to be fair, he was significantly younger and faster at the time.
True, true.
But beyond his youth, he survived intense persecution. Tradition holds he survived being thrown into a vat of boiling oil in Rome.
A boiling oil?
Yeah, that's the tradition. And he survived being exiled to the prison island of Patmos to work the mines, which is actually where he wrote the book of Revelation. The man's entire existence was just a refusal to quit. He kept surviving, kept remaining, and kept writing.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me, because if John's job was to live and write, he faced an intellectually impossible task. I mean, he outlived everyone. He had a century of wild history, profound philosophical breakthroughs, and universe-altering events just sitting in his brain.
A massive burden of knowledge.
Yeah, and his only tools to capture a movement that redefined human history were some parchment and a pen.
It is the ultimate paradox of communication. Like, how do you compress a boundless, infinite reality into the incredibly rigid boundaries of human language?
You can't.
John actually addresses this struggle at the very end of his gospel. He writes that if everything Jesus did were written down, he supposes the whole world literally wouldn't have enough room for the books that would be written.
Now, I have to push back on this a little bit. Is John just being a dramatic writer here? You know, the classic, I have so many crazy stories, we'd literally run out of library space, hyperbole. Or is there a deeper mechanic at play regarding how we actually communicate?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Reflections argue is not hyperbole at all.
Okay.
It is a profound philosophical statement about the friction between the infinite and the finite. Just think about how human language actually functions. Language relies entirely on creating boundaries.
It puts things in a box so our brains can process them, like a noun draws a fence around an object?
Exactly. A noun tells you, this object is a tree, therefore it is not a rock. A verb locks an event into a strict timeline. It already happened, or it will happen. Language is fundamentally a tool of limitation, just so we can comprehend our physical environment.
Right.
But the reality John is trying to describe, the divine, the absolute truth, it has no boundaries. It defies time. It defies categories. The Vietnamese reflections focus heavily on that intimate moment when John leaned on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper.
Oh, wow.
The concept is that John was listening to the soundless word, the infinite essence.
Trying to pour that infinite essence into human vocabulary is like trying to pour the Pacific Ocean into a teacup. I mean, the world literally cannot contain the books, not because of the physical volume of paper, but because the finite categories of human thought simply shatter when you try to force the infinite inside them.
Right, the teacup doesn't overflow, it breaks.
Yes.
It's an excellent way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
The container is just fundamentally incompatible with the substance.
Which honestly sounds like an absolute nightmare for a writer. Like, how do you communicate anything at all to the world if the words themselves are basically built to fail?
You have to bypass the complexity entirely.
Oh.
Well, the historical tradition of John in his final days in Ephesus perfectly illustrates how he solved this linguistic puzzle. He was nearing 100 years old. He was so physically frail he couldn't even walk anymore. His followers had to literally carry him into their gatherings on a cot.
Oh man, I'm just imagining this room full of eager followers leaning in, waiting for the last living apostle to drop the most mind-bending, complex theological manifesto ever conceived.
And he didn't deliver a manifesto.
Yeah.
He was far too weak for long speeches anyway. Instead, the tradition says he just repeated one single sentence over and over. Love one another.
Just that.
That was it. Love one another. And the texts note that the people never grew tired of hearing it.
Because he finally found the teacup that wouldn't break.
Exactly. He stripped away all the heavy, boundary-laden theology and distilled a century of profound observation into a single human action. Because love is the only human action that actually mirrors the infinite.
Wow.
It doesn't require complex vocabulary to bear witness to it. The finite words finally held the infinite meaning.
So we have Peter the frontline martyr and John the quiet, ancient writer who distills the infinite into a single action. But the source text doesn't stop with the first century. It explores how this idea of witness echoes throughout history.
Right, it's an ongoing process.
Because if the calling adapts to the individual, you get some highly unique and sometimes truly bizarre paths of witness. The universe will use whatever tools are available.
And history thrives on irony. Often the most powerful witnesses are the ones who never intended to be part of the story at all, or who, actively tried to stop it.
Oh, absolutely.
Take the French Enlightenment philosopher Voltaire.
Oh, the Voltaire story in these reflections is one of my favorite historical ironies of all time.
It's so good. So Voltaire was brilliant, he was wealthy, and he made it his absolute life's mission to dismantle the Christian faith. He had a massive ego, too.
Clearly.
He famously bragged that while it took 12 uneducated fishermen to build Christianity, he, one highly educated Frenchman, was going to single-handedly destroy it.
He also had a massive intellectual rivalry with Isaac Newton over biblical texts, didn't he?
He did. So Newton spent a lot of time studying biblical prophecy, particularly the book of Daniel. And based on those texts, Newton theorized that human knowledge would eventually increase to the point where mankind could travel at the mind-boggling speed of 40 miles per hour.
40 miles per hour.
Right, which sounds hilarious now. But Voltaire found this incredibly stupid. He used it as public proof that religion had literally rotted Newton's brilliant mind. Voltaire vehemently argued that a man's heart would just explode at his chest if he traveled 40 miles per hour.
Think about that next time you are stuck in traffic doing 45. Your heart should be exploding.
Right.
But the real punchline is what happened to Voltaire's legacy after his death.
This is where the adaptation of the mission gets fascinating. Voltaire used his considerable wealth, his massive intellect, and his personal printing press to publish his fierce critiques. But just a couple of decades after he died, the Geneva Bible Society purchased his estate.
Oh, the irony.
They used Voltaire's own house to store massive quantities of Bibles, and they used his very own printing press, the machinery he built, to destroy the text, to print copies of the scriptures.
The man who dedicated his life to stopping the message became the literal machinery that amplified it. You really cannot script a better irony.
You really can't.
But the texts also show that this adaptation isn't always antagonistic. Sometimes it is just wildly out of context for what we'd expect, like Sister Christina Scuccia.
Oh, yes. A perfect modern example of breaking boundaries. Think about how we typically compartmentalize our lives. We have our spiritual beliefs over here in one box and our secular jobs or hobbies over there in another box.
Right, totally separate.
Sister Christina shattered that compartmentalization. She was a 25-year-old Ursuline nun in Italy who decided to audition for the reality TV show The Voice.
Picture the scene for a second. The judges' chairs are turned away from the stage. Someone starts belting out this unbelievably soulful, powerful rendition of Alicia Keys' No One.
An amazing song, by the way.
Incredible song. The judges hit their buttons, spin their chairs around, and their brains just short-circuit. Because standing there on a neon-lit pop stage holding a microphone is a woman in a full traditional religious habit. Veil, crucifix, sensible shoes, the whole thing.
I mean, when the music stopped and the judges finally recovered from the shock, they asked her why on earth a nun was competing on a pop singing show.
What did she say?
She didn't offer some complex theological treatise. She gave a very John in Ephesus answer. She simply said, I have a gift, and I want to share it.
I love that. So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? The universe does not need another Peter to be crucified, and it doesn't need another John to live to 100. The calling morphs to fit the container.
Exactly.
Abraham was called when he was an old man to pack up his entire life. Moses was pulled out of a river and raised in a royal palace before heading into the desert. Sister Christina walked onto a reality TV stage.
This raises an important question for you, the person listening right now.
Yeah.
What environment are you currently standing in? The reflections use a highly mechanical analogy to drive this concept home. Think about Niagara Falls. You have millions of gallons of water plummeting down with terrifying, majestic force. But all of that raw, natural power does not generate a single watt of usable electricity on its own.
Right.
It requires human hands to go in and build the turbines.
Or think of vast underground oil reserves. They hold massive potential energy, but they just sit there doing absolutely nothing unless someone brings an engine to combust them. The power exists, but it desperately needs an apparatus to convert it into something functional.
The infinite potential of the soundless word, of truth, of profound love, of positive change, it operates the exact same way. It is a massive flowing force, but it needs your specific turbine to be realized in the physical world.
Wow, yeah.
It needs your unique, seemingly finite, completely ordinary life to translate.
Which honestly brings us full circle to Jesus's words to Peter. What is that to you? You follow me. We spend so much energy looking sideways, worried that someone else's turbine is bigger or flashier or placed in a more scenic part of the river. We assume our place of witness needs to be a grand stage or a dramatic martyr's cross. But maybe your place of witness is your chaotic family room while you raise your kids?
Or a boring spreadsheet on a Tuesday morning.
Exactly. Maybe it's the factory floor.
We've spent this deep dive exploring the contrast between dying for a cause and doing the unglamorous work of living for one. And we've talked about the soundless word, that infinite truth that breaks the rigid boundaries of human language.
It's a lot to process.
It is. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Ask yourself, what is your own soundless word? What is a core truth, a deep conviction, or a profound love you hold inside that you constantly struggle to articulate with just nouns and verbs?
That's a great question.
Stop worrying about finding the perfect vocabulary to explain it to the world. Instead, consider how you might express that truth tomorrow, not through a grand dramatic speech, but through a simple mundane action. Because sometimes the absolute most profound way to speak the infinite is to just show up, build your turbine, and do the quiet work of remaining.